Hollywood, a land of dazzling lights, golden statues, and eternal legends. But beneath the glitz and red carpets lies a darker story, one of arrogance, betrayal, and reputations shattered by their own creators. The stars we once adored for their beauty, their talent, and their unforgettable roles often carried shadows far larger than their fame. Imagine cheering for a Hollywood heartthrob, only to discover he screamed at directors and humiliated his co-stars. Picture an actress praised for her elegance, but feared on set for her volcanic temper. Or a comedy genius who could make the world laugh and then make everyone on set cry. These aren't tabloid rumors. They are the hidden truths of Tinseltown, where brilliance and toxicity often walked hand in hand. Some of these names will surprise you. Others you may already suspect. But every single one of them reveals the same chilling reality. In Hollywood, the higher you rise, the more devastating your fall can be. So tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on the 25 most hated stars in Hollywood history, the icons whose scandals, feuds, and dark secrets made them unforgettable not only for their art, but also for the chaos they left behind. Shelley Winters was more than just a starlet. She was a force of nature, both dazzling and destructive. With her undeniable talent, she could command the screen with a single glance. But that same intensity that made her unforgettable in films also made her one of the most feared women in Hollywood. Shelley didn't just speak her mind, she unleashed it. If something bothered her, the entire set knew it within seconds. Directors often admitted they felt as though they were walking on eggshells, never certain when her temper would flare. And flare it did frequently. She turned rehearsals into battlegrounds, and co-stars dreaded the storm that followed any disagreement. Her feud with Marilyn Monroe is one of Hollywood's most legendary clashes. What began as a friendship between two ambitious women quickly turned into a rivalry filled with cutting remarks and explosive confrontations. Winters once called Marilyn the most insecure person I ever met, a line so brutal it echoed across gossip columns for years. On set, Shelley was less a collaborator and more a commander. She demanded attention, respect, and absolute control. Directors described her as brilliant but impossible. Co-stars admitted working with her left them drained, even traumatized. Yet, no one could deny that the chaos she carried often translated into unforgettable performances. Shelley Winters was not designed to be loved, she was designed to be remembered. And remembered she is, as both a powerhouse of talent and one of the most notoriously difficult divas to ever set foot in Hollywood. Ryan O'Neal was once the picture of Hollywood perfection. With his classic good looks and breakthrough role in Love Story, he became the heartthrob of an entire generation. To the outside world, he was the golden boy who could do no wrong, but behind that charming smile was a storm waiting to break. O'Neal's off-screen life told a very different story, one filled with rage, scandal, and fractured relationships. On set, he was notorious for clashing with co-stars and sparring with directors, his ego often taking center stage. Ali MacGraw, his Love Story co-star, bore the brunt of his temper, while his long, turbulent romance with Farrah Fawcett became a tabloid saga filled with public fights and emotional meltdowns. But the deepest wounds were left within his own family. His daughter, Tatum O'Neal, herself a child star, painted a harrowing picture of life with Ryan. In her memoir, she described him not as a protective father, but as volatile, intimidating, and destructive. Their relationship, filled with accusations of abuse and neglect, became one of Hollywood's most tragic father-daughter dramas, spilling into the public eye in brutal detail. And then came the arrests, drug possession charges that shattered any remaining illusion of the golden boy he once was. The man who once symbolized romance and youthful innocence had transformed into a cautionary tale of squandered talent and toxic fame. Ryan O'Neal's downfall wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a reminder of how quickly Hollywood can turn its back when the mask of perfection slips away. Dennis Hopper was Hollywood's ultimate wild card, a man whose genius on screen was matched only by the havoc he wreaked off it. To watch him act was to witness raw electricity, a talent so magnetic that even his critics couldn't look away. But to work with him, that was another story entirely. On the set of Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola wasn't just directing a film, he was surviving a storm. Hopper's behavior was so erratic that the production team practically needed a separate crew just to manage him. He arrived on set high, disheveled, and often unprepared, picking fights with cast and crew as if conflict was part of his contract. Every shoot with him felt less like filmmaking and more like crisis management. Off-screen, things weren't calmer. Hopper's life was a whirlwind of failed marriages, addictions, and broken friendships. His legendary fallout with Easy Rider co-star Peter Fonda became one of Hollywood's most infamous splits, as the man who once embodied counterculture freedom spiraled into destructive excess. And yet, no matter how many bridges he burned, Hollywood kept calling him back. Why? Because his talent was undeniable. His performances carried the kind of manic brilliance that couldn't be faked. Hopper could turn chaos into art, pain into poetry, but at the cost of everyone's sanity around him. Dennis Hopper will always be remembered as both a genius and a nightmare, a man who blurred the line between brilliance and self-destruction until they became one and the same. Mickey Rooney was proof that size means nothing when it comes to causing chaos. Barely over 5 feet tall, he was once America's sweetheart, the boyish charmer with a grin that could melt hearts. But behind the curtain, that charm quickly soured. Rooney wasn't just difficult. He was domineering, demanding, and relentless. On set, he wanted to be in control of everything. Directors dreaded his creative input, which often meant bulldozing through scenes his own way or throwing tantrums when he didn't get what he wanted. Co-stars described working with him as exhausting, like trying to survive a hurricane in tap shoes. No matter the project, Rooney had to be the center of attention, leaving little room for collaboration. His personal life was equally turbulent. Rooney married 8 times, yes, 8, and every relationship seemed to crash in a storm of jealousy, control, and heartbreak. His fiery romance with Ava Gardner was the stuff of tabloids, with Ava later describing him as suffocating and possessive. And despite earning millions over his long career, Mickey's financial troubles were legendary. Bankruptcies, lawsuits, and endless finger-pointing at accountants painted the picture of a man who could never escape his own chaos. He was a star who had everything: talent, fame, fortune, and yet managed to lose it all. To the public, Mickey Rooney was lovable on screen. To those who worked with him, he was Hollywood's pint-sized tyrant, a man whose shadow loomed far larger than his height ever could. If there was ever a name that struck fear into directors and actors alike, it was Klaus Kinski. He wasn't just intense, he was explosive, a man whose very presence on set felt like standing next to a live grenade. You never knew when he'd go off, only that he would. Kinski didn't argue, he erupted. He screamed at directors, humiliated co-stars, and terrorized crews. His ego was so enormous it practically needed its own trailer. Werner Herzog, the director who worked with him the most, once admitted he actually considered hiring a hitman to deal with Kinski. That wasn't a joke, it was the level of madness Klaus brought wherever he went. His reputation for volatility was legendary, but the true horror came off screen. In later years, his daughter, Paula Kinski, accused him of years of sexual abuse, a revelation so harrowing it transformed his image from difficult genius to outright monster. What little respect he had left in Hollywood evaporated instantly. And yet, his performances were undeniably magnetic. Kinski's sheer intensity gave life to characters no one else could play, making him unforgettable on screen but unbearable in real life. He became the ultimate paradox, admired for his art, despised for his humanity. In the end, Klaus Kinski wasn't just one of the most hated men in Hollywood, he was one of the most feared, leaving behind a legacy as toxic as it was unforgettable. At just 10 years old, Tatum O'Neal made history. She became the youngest actor ever to win an Academy Award for her performance in Paper Moon, a moment that should have signaled a bright and unstoppable career. To the world, she was the picture of innocence and promise. But Hollywood doesn't nurture its children, it devours them. Growing up in the glare of the spotlight, Tatum's life quickly spiraled into turmoil. Her relationship with her father, Ryan O'Neal, was anything but supportive. What should have been a bond of love turned into one of bitterness, neglect, and abuse. She would later reveal heartbreaking stories of emotional chaos that painted her childhood as a nightmare lived out under the flash of cameras. As she entered adulthood, the pain only deepened. Arrests for heroin possession, public meltdowns, and tabloid scandals kept her name alive, but for all the wrong reasons. Directors who once saw her as a prodigy now saw her as a liability, unsure whether they were hiring a gifted actress or a looming disaster. And yet, through all of the collapse, Tatum's talent never fully vanished. There were flashes of the child star who once captivated the world, glimpses of the woman she could have been had the industry treated her with care. Instead, she became the ultimate cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when fame arrives too soon and no one teaches you how to survive in its shadow. Tatum O'Neal's story isn't just tragic, it's haunting. A life that began with triumph but became consumed by darkness, leaving her remembered not only for her talent, but for the pain that defined her. John Wayne was more than just a movie star, he was a symbol. To millions, he embodied rugged masculinity, the all-American cowboy, the unshakable hero who stood tall against any storm. But behind the legend of the Duke was a man whose off-screen persona made him one of the most divisive figures in Hollywood history. Wayne didn't just play the tough guy, he lived it. Directors often found him impossible to manage, as he rejected notes and refused to compromise. For Wayne, there was only one way, his way. Even seasoned filmmakers like Howard Hawks admitted clashing with him, but few dared to push back too far against the industry's towering icon. What truly ignited controversy, however, were his politics and outspoken opinions. Wayne was a staunch supporter of the Vietnam War and made remarks about race that, even at the time, shocked many. To his admirers, he was the voice of traditional values and unflinching patriotism. To his critics, he was a relic of a harsher, outdated era, an actor whose words aged as poorly as milk left under the desert Sunday. For every fan who worshipped his swagger and grit, there was another who despised his arrogance and rigidity. The man who symbolized freedom and strength on screen became, in real life, a lightning rod for conflict and controversy. John Wayne's legend remains intact in cinema history, but his off-screen battles left a legacy far more complicated. He wasn't just the Duke, he was the drama, and in many ways, the fight never ended. Joan Crawford wasn't just an actress, she was an empire in heels. From the moment she entered Hollywood, she demanded not only attention but obedience. Her screen presence was undeniable, a mixture of glamour, grit, and icy precision. But that same obsession with perfection made her one of the most feared women in the industry. On set, Joan's reputation was legendary. She expected spotless sets, flawless lighting, and absolute discipline. Directors whispered that she could turn a film shoot into a battlefield with nothing more than a glare. Assistants dreaded crossing her path, because the smallest mistake, a misplaced prop, a delayed cue, could ignite a full-scale eruption. To Joan, filmmaking wasn't collaboration, it was command. Her need for control didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. At home, she maintained the same militant order. Every room pristine, every item perfectly placed, every moment of her public image choreographed like a scene from one of her films. She didn't just live life, she directed it. And then, of course, there was the feud. Her rivalry with Bette Davis became one of Hollywood's greatest legends, exploding during the making of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. On screen, they played sisters locked in madness and cruelty. Off screen, the tension was even more vicious. Every insult, every petty sabotage, every daggered look was real, and the tabloids feasted on it. Joan Crawford built herself into a Hollywood titan, but she did so with claws out. To admire her was to fear her. She wasn't there to be liked, she was there to dominate. And dominate she did, leaving a legacy as dazzling as it was terrifying. Claudia Cardinale had everything Hollywood adored: timeless beauty, undeniable talent, and a magnetic screen presence. Studios wanted to mold her into the next global superstar, a glamorous pinup to rival the likes of Sophia Loren and Brigitte Bardot. But Claudia wasn't interested in being a Hollywood puppet. She chose defiance, and in doing so, earned both admiration and resentment. While her peers chased after American contracts and publicity tours, Claudia turned her gaze toward European cinema. She sought depth over dollars, artistry over empty fame. Producers in Hollywood were baffled. They wanted her draped in diamonds on red carpets. Instead, she was delivering powerhouse performances in Italian and French films, working with auteurs who valued her craft rather than her curves. To American tabloids, her distance made her seem aloof, even arrogant. She didn't play their game, no gossip-driven scandals, no publicity stunts, no desperate climb for fame. To the Hollywood system, that was almost unforgivable. They didn't hate her for bad behavior, they hated her for refusing to bend. And yet, that choice secured her a very different kind of legacy. In Europe, Claudia became a legend, an actress respected for her artistry, a woman admired for her independence. In America, she became a mystery, untouchable and enigmatic. While others chased fleeting stardom, Claudia Cardinal carved her own path, leaving Hollywood both frustrated and in awe. She wasn't the diva who screamed at directors or the scandal magnate who filled tabloids. She was something far more dangerous in Tinseltown, a woman who could say no. Robert Blake had the kind of face you didn't forget, rugged, sharp, unforgettable. For years, he carved out a solid career, winning acclaim for his gritty roles and even earning an Emmy for his performance in Beretta. To audiences, he was tough, charismatic, the quintessential Hollywood tough guy. But by the early 2000s, his name wasn't being spoken in connection with acting awards, it was being shouted in courtrooms. In 2001, Blake's wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, was found shot dead in his car outside a restaurant. His explanation? He claimed he had left her to retrieve a gun he had forgotten inside. When he returned, she was dead. To the public, it sounded less like coincidence and more like a grim screenplay. Suspicion spread like wildfire. The case consumed Hollywood. Tabloids compared it to the O.J. Simpson trial, another fallen star whose life became courtroom theater. Though Blake was acquitted in criminal court, he was later found liable in a civil suit. He walked free, but his reputation was destroyed forever. Even before the murder scandal, Blake wasn't beloved. On set, he had long been known as combative, short-tempered, and resistant to direction. Co-stars avoided him, directors dreaded him, and Hollywood had already started to turn its back. The trial only sealed his fate. Robert Blake went from celebrated actor to tabloid headline, his career buried beneath suspicion, scandal, and a story too twisted for even Hollywood to script. He didn't just lose his reputation, he obliterated it. Peter Sellers could make the world laugh like few others. His iconic performances in the Pink Panther films and countless comedies proved his brilliance. He was a master of timing, improvisation, and transformation. On screen, he was magic. But behind the laughter, Sellers was anything but easy to love. Working with him was described as walking through a minefield. His moods swung like a pendulum, shifting from charming and generous one moment to cruel and volatile the next. Directors recalled him storming off sets in fits of rage, refusing to work if a prop wasn't placed exactly how he wanted it. He would stop entire productions over trivial details, treating cast and crew as if they were intruders in his kingdom of comedy. Blake Edwards, his longtime collaborator and director of the Pink Panther series, once described him as both a genius and a nightmare. That contradiction defined Sellers' life. His brilliance was undeniable, but so was his destructiveness. His personal life mirrored his professional chaos. 4 marriages, each marked by volatility and heartbreak, left behind a trail of bitter exes and tabloid headlines. His second wife, actress Britt Ekland, spoke openly about his controlling and sometimes terrifying behavior. To her, the man the world adored was often cruel and impossible to endure. In the end, Sellers embodied the paradox of Hollywood genius, adored by audiences, detested by colleagues, and remembered not only for his brilliance but for the chaos he left in his wake. He didn't just play unpredictable characters, he lived as one. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a Hollywood star, she was Hollywood royalty. With her violet eyes, breathtaking beauty, and undeniable talent, she captivated audiences across the globe. But beyond the glamour and the Oscars, Liz Taylor was infamous for a personal life that played out like the most dramatic soap opera ever written. She married 8 times to 7 men, turning matrimony into a headline sport. Her love affair with Richard Burton was the stuff of legend, passionate, destructive, and endlessly fascinating. They fought as fiercely as they loved, breaking up in front-page divorces only to remarry again as if Hollywood itself demanded a sequel. Paparazzi camped outside their homes, knowing every fight, every kiss, and every diamond would make the next day's news. And, oh, the diamonds. Elizabeth's jewelry collection was almost as famous as her films. The Taylor Burton diamond alone was so massive it seemed to deserve its own zip code. To some, she was pure extravagance, a woman drunk on fame and fortune. To others, she was irresistible, an icon who lived life unapologetically, with no intention of toning down her shine. Critics accused her of being too dramatic, too indulgent, too much. But that was the point. Elizabeth Taylor was too much, and that's exactly why the world couldn't stop watching. She turned scandal into art, heartbreak into headlines, and indulgence into immortality. In the end, Liz Taylor wasn't just an actress, she was the embodiment of Hollywood excess, a queen who reigned over diamonds, divorces, and decades of delicious drama. Roman Polanski is one of the most polarizing figures in Hollywood's history. As a filmmaker, he was nothing short of brilliant. He gave the world classics like Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown, works that remain masterpieces of cinematic craft. But his genius was forever overshadowed by the scandal that turned him into one of the most reviled names in the industry. In 1977, Polanski was arrested on charges involving a minor, a case that immediately ignited a media firestorm. The details were shocking, the courtroom tense, and Hollywood itself was split in disbelief. Before sentencing, Polanski made a choice that cemented his legacy, not as a director, but as a fugitive. He fled the United States and has lived abroad ever since. A man celebrated in some circles and condemned in others. What made the scandal even more unsettling was Hollywood's conflicted response. Some defended him, pointing to his artistic contributions. Others denounced him, arguing that no brilliance could excuse the crime. Yet awards and accolades continued to find him overseas, a contradiction that revealed just how morally tangled the industry could be. To this day, Roman Polanski remains a ghost in Hollywood, a genius whose work changed cinema, but whose actions cast a shadow so dark it can never be erased. His story is proof that in Tinseltown, brilliance and disgrace can live side by side, and sometimes the fall from grace is more memorable than the art itself. Frank Sinatra was adored for his velvet voice, his smooth charisma, and a musical legacy that still defines an era. To the world, he was Old Blue Eyes, the man who could croon love songs with effortless charm. But offstage, Sinatra was as feared as he was admired. His temper was legendary, his grudges unforgiving, and his connections, well, those raised even more eyebrows than his love life. Sinatra's fury could ignite in an instant. Photographers risked black eyes if they caught him at the wrong angle. Journalists whispered about his violent outbursts and his notorious intolerance for criticism. Waiters, assistants, even close friends tread carefully because when Frank snapped, there was no going back. Then came the mob rumors, whispers that never seemed to fade. Dinners with infamous mobsters, favors exchanged in smoke-filled rooms. Sinatra's name was never far from the shadows of organized crime. Though never proven in court, the gossip was relentless, painting him as a man whose influence stretched far beyond the microphone. And when it came to romance, Sinatra lived like a storm. 4 marriages, countless affairs, and heartbreaks left in his wake only fueled his reputation as Hollywood's most volatile lover. To his fans, he was magnetic. To those closest to him, he was unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, and always larger than life. Frank Sinatra may have sung My Way, but in reality, his way often left chaos behind. A legend? Absolutely. But also a man whose darker side made him as hated as he was adored. Lana Turner was Hollywood perfection, a stunning blonde with elegance, talent, and a career filled with hit films. She was the dream girl of the silver screen, but her private life was a tabloid writer's fantasy, filled with scandal, heartbreak, and one shocking incident that became the defining headline of her career. That moment came in 1958, when her teenage daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed Lana's abusive gangster boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, to death. The killing rocked Hollywood like an earthquake. Stompanato had been violent and controlling, and after yet another explosive argument, Cheryl intervened with a kitchen knife. The court ruled it justifiable homicide, but the press called it something else: the scandal of the decade. Overnight, Lana Turner went from glamorous starlet to the center of one of Hollywood's most infamous true crime stories. But even before that, Lana's reputation carried a whiff of chaos. She was notorious for being high maintenance on set, clashing with directors, and demanding the very best. Her romances were a carousel of heartbreaks and controversies, fueling gossip columns as much as her acting did. And yet, no matter how wild the scandals, Lana Turner always emerged seemingly untouchable, immaculate gowns, flawless makeup. Her poise never cracked. She lived like a movie character, her life a blend of elegance and catastrophe, always framed for the cameras. Lana Turner's legacy proves one truth about Hollywood: sometimes the most glamorous stars shine brightest, not in spite of scandal, but because of it. Jane Fonda was destined for stardom. Born into a Hollywood dynasty and blessed with striking beauty and undeniable talent, she quickly rose to fame, earning Academy Awards and respect across the industry. But her career would soon collide with politics, creating one of the most controversial legacies in Hollywood history. In 1972, Fonda made a trip to North Vietnam during the height of the Vietnam War. A photograph of her smiling while seated on an anti-aircraft gun used against American soldiers spread across the world like wildfire. Almost overnight, she went from Hollywood's darling to public enemy number one. Veterans branded her a traitor, protesters burned effigies of her, and the nickname Hanoi Jane became a stain that would follow her for decades. While Fonda insisted her intentions were to protest the war, not the soldiers, the damage was irreversible. The public's fury was so intense that her career nearly collapsed under the weight of the backlash. For some, her apology years later was too little, too late. And controversy didn't end there. In the 1,980 seconds, she reinvented herself as the queen of fitness, her aerobics tapes becoming a worldwide phenomenon. But even that sparked new criticism, as detractors accused her of pushing unrealistic beauty standards. If you didn't hate her politics, you probably hated her workout routines. Jane Fonda's story shows how a single moment can define or haunt a star forever. For all her achievements, she remains one of Hollywood's most divisive figures, admired and despised in equal measure. Faye Dunaway was breathtaking, magnetic, and impossibly talented. From Bonnie and Clyde to Network, she carved her place among Hollywood's greats. But alongside her brilliance came a reputation so fierce that directors, co-stars, and crew members often dreaded her presence. To work with Faye was to prepare for battle. On the set of Mommy Dearest, she didn't just play Joan Crawford, she became her. Crew members swore she never broke character, blurring the line between performance and reality. The shouting fits, the biting insults, the terrifying intensity, it was all-consuming. For some, it was art. For others, it was psychological warfare. Her perfectionism bordered on tyranny. If something fell short of her impossible standards, the entire production felt her wrath. Directors admitted they feared confronting her, while co-stars quietly prayed to survive the shoot unscathed. Her volatility was so infamous that Hollywood's unwritten rule became clear: never work with children, animals, or Faye Dunaway. Off-screen, her fiery personality fueled legendary feuds. Her clashes with Roman Polanski, who once yanked her hair on set, only added to the myth of Dunaway's uncontrollable temper. Yet, behind the chaos, her performances still sparkled with brilliance. That was the paradox of Faye, a woman capable of unforgettable art, but at a cost so steep few dared to pay it twice. Faye Dunaway remains a Hollywood icon, but also one of its most dreaded. To admire her is easy. To work with her was a nightmare no one forgot. Marilyn Monroe was the face of Hollywood glamour: the blonde curls, the red lips, the sultry voice that could captivate the entire world. To audiences, she was perfection personified. But beneath the diamonds and dazzling smiles was a woman trapped, fragile, and often resented within the very system that built her. On set, Marilyn was notoriously unreliable. She arrived late, sometimes hours behind schedule, or missed entire shooting days altogether. Directors tore their hair out, and crews whispered in frustration. Yet when the cameras finally rolled, all was forgiven, because Marilyn delivered magic. Chaotic, fragile, heartbreaking magic that no one else could replicate. But Marilyn wasn't content being Hollywood's dumb blonde. She yearned for creative control, respect, and roles that went deeper than glamour shots. In a bold and unprecedented move for a woman in the 1950 seconds, she founded her own production company, an act of defiance that terrified studio executives. She may have looked delicate, but she wasn't stupid. Marilyn was fighting for her voice, even as the world tried to silence her. Behind the fame, however, she struggled with depression, anxiety, and the crushing weight of being the most desired woman in the world. Pills, loneliness, and the relentless press closed in around her. To some, she was adored. To others, she was despised for her unpredictability and her refusal to play by the rules. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just Hollywood's brightest star, she was also one of its most tragic. Loved, hated, envied, and pitied, she redefined what it meant to be an icon, even as it destroyed her. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting. With his raw intensity in A Streetcar Named Desire and his haunting power in The Godfather, he was hailed as a genius who reshaped cinema forever. But behind the brilliance was a man who turned chaos into an art form and left colleagues fuming in his wake. On set, Brando was notoriously difficult. During Apocalypse Now, he arrived overweight, unprepared, and without having read the script. He refused to memorize lines, insisting they be read to him like bedtime stories. Directors despaired, producers tore their hair out, and co-stars quietly raged. Yet somehow, when the cameras rolled, Brando's performances were so magnetic they made audiences forget the madness it took to get there. But Brando's battles weren't confined to sets. He wielded lawsuits like weapons, clashed with studio executives, and treated Hollywood rules with outright contempt. Off-screen, he was no less complicated. A passionate activist, a notorious lover, and an often absent father. His personal scandals, affairs, and broken family ties painted a picture of a man as troubled as he was talented. Then came the Oscars moment that cemented his status as both a hero and a villain. In 1973, Brando refused his Academy Award for The Godfather, sending Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather to decline it on live television. Some praised his boldness, others seethed at his defiance. It was classic Brando, brilliant, confrontational, unforgettable. Marlon Brando remains a paradox, a legend whose artistry reshaped film, but whose arrogance and unpredictability made him one of Hollywood's most hated colleagues. He didn't just ghost reality, he rewrote it on his own terms. Natalie Wood seemed to have it all: the looks of an angel, the charm of a true star, and a film career that began when she was just a child. By the time she reached adulthood, she had cemented herself as one of Hollywood's most beloved leading ladies, but her story would not end with applause. It would end with one of the most haunting mysteries in Tinseltown history. In November 1981, Natalie was on a yacht with her husband Robert Wagner and fellow actor Christopher Walken. Hours later, she was found drowned in the waters off Catalina Island, dressed in only a nightgown and socks. The official story called it an accident, but rumors immediately swirled. Witnesses spoke of heated arguments that night. Wagner's statements shifted over the years, and Walken remained cryptically silent. The case left more questions than answers, sparking decades of speculation. When investigators reopened the case in 2011 and named Wagner a person of interest, the mystery only deepened. Was it truly an accident? Was there foul play? Or was it a Hollywood cover-up that would never be solved? The public fascination endures, and so does the unease. Even before her tragic death, Natalie carried a reputation for fragility behind her radiant smile. She was adored by fans but often underestimated by the industry, her personal struggles with fear and vulnerability quietly shadowing her success. In the end, Natalie Wood's legacy is twofold: a gifted actress who brought warmth and brilliance to the screen, and a Hollywood enigma whose death remains one of the industry's darkest unsolved stories. Bette Davis wasn't just a star, she was a warrior. Long before strong female leads became fashionable, Davis was already tearing down barriers and rewriting Hollywood's rules. With her fierce eyes, biting wit, and unrelenting drive, she became both admired and feared. a woman who demanded respect in an industry built to silence women. On set, Davis refused to settle for mediocrity. If a co-star was lazy, she called them out. If a director slacked, she fought him head-on. She once sued Warner Brothers for better roles. She lost the case, but won the war by proving that actresses could challenge the system and survive. Every project she touched bore the mark of her ferocity, but her fire came at a cost. Davis's sharp tongue and refusal to compromise earned her countless enemies. Crews dreaded her demands, executives labeled her difficult, and rivals trembled at the thought of competing with her. And no rivalry was more infamous than her feud with Joan Crawford. Their battle during Whatever Happened to Baby Jane wasn't just a clash of characters, it was a real-life war, full of insults, sabotage, and venom that spilled far beyond the screen. To some, Bette Davis was impossible. To others, she was unstoppable. She carved out her place not by being agreeable, but by being undeniable. And though many hated her in her time, history remembers her as one of Hollywood's fiercest icons, the star who never blinked first. Judy Garland's voice could stop the world. When she sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, she didn't just perform, she gave the world a piece of her soul. To audiences, she was radiant, magical, unforgettable. But behind the curtain, Garland's life was one of the darkest tragedies Hollywood ever produced. Pushed into the spotlight as a child, Judy quickly became the studio's prized possession. But that possession came at a terrible cost. To keep her thin, executives fed her amphetamines. To keep her working long hours, they gave her stimulants. And when exhaustion consumed her, they prescribed sleeping pills. What the studios called management was, in truth, a systematic destruction of a young girl's body and mind. As she grew older, the damage only deepened. Addiction haunted her, depression consumed her, and her relationships collapsed one after another. 5 marriages, each more turbulent than the last, left her with heartbreak as constant as her fame. On set, she could be radiant one day and unreliable the next, an actress torn between brilliance and breakdown. And yet, through every storm, her voice endured. Raw, aching, filled with both hope and despair, it reminded the world why she was loved in the first place. But even that gift couldn't save her from herself or from an industry that had used her up too young. Judy Garland wasn't just a star. She was a warning, a legend forged by Hollywood's relentless machine, and a soul broken by the very system that made her shine. Howard Hughes was once the ultimate American success story. A dashing billionaire, a brilliant engineer, a daring aviator, and a Hollywood mogul, he seemed to have it all. But behind the glamour of his wealth and power was a man slowly consumed by paranoia, obsession, and madness. In the early years, Hughes was admired for his bold vision. He poured fortunes into films like Hell's Angels and The Outlaw, pushing technology and storytelling to new heights. But his perfectionism was crippling. He would re-edit films endlessly, halting projects for years while obsessing over single frames. To those who worked with him, Hughes wasn't just demanding, he was impossible. As time passed, his eccentricities grew darker. Hughes became obsessed with germs, scrubbing his hands raw, burning clothes after wearing them, and locking himself away in sterile hotel rooms. Stories spread of him wandering through rooms with Kleenex boxes on his feet, issuing commands to assistants he barely trusted. His brilliance as a businessman had twisted into full-blown paranoia. Hollywood tried to tolerate him because of his money and influence, but eventually, Hughes vanished from public life entirely. He spent his final years a recluse in a Las Vegas penthouse, his empire crumbling even as his legend grew. Howard Hughes remains both admired and pitied, a man who conquered the skies, ruled Hollywood for a time, and then became a prisoner of his own mind. His story is the ultimate Hollywood cautionary tale. When genius collides with madness, it doesn't end with applause. Joan Collins wasn't just a star of the screen, she was the embodiment of glamour, scandal, and unapologetic diva energy. When she stepped into the role of Alexis Carrington on Dynasty, she didn't just play a character. She redefined what it meant to be a soap opera icon. With icy stares, razor-sharp one-liners, and gowns sharp enough to cut glass, Collins turned television into must-watch theater. But behind the cameras, Joan was just as fiery. On set, she demanded perfection, refusing to tolerate sloppiness or laziness. Her feud with co-star Linda Evans was legendary. Their on-screen catfights became cultural phenomena, but insiders whispered that the tension was just as fierce once the director yelled, "Cut!" The rivalry fueled gossip columns and, in many ways, fueled the success of the show itself. Her personal life was no less turbulent. With 5 marriages, countless affairs, and an endless stream of scandalous quotes, Joan was never far from the headlines. She didn't chase drama, it chased her, heels clicking on marble floors, champagne glass in hand. Collins understood the game of fame better than most. She knew that being talked about, whether loved or hated, was the true currency of Hollywood. And so, she leaned into it, wearing her diva crown proudly while the world gossiped in awe. To this day, Joan Collins remains the reigning queen of drama, remembered not only for her talent, but for proving that in Hollywood, scandal can be just as powerful as stardom. Charlie Chaplin is remembered as one of cinema's greatest pioneers, a man who built Hollywood's golden age with nothing more than a bowler hat, a cane, and his unmatched ability to make audiences laugh without saying a word. He was a genius, no doubt a silent era titan, whose influence still echoes in film today. But even geniuses can be despised, and Chaplin made enemies at every turn. Behind the lovable tramp character was a man as stubborn as he was brilliant. Chaplin demanded total control over his films, often driving crews to exhaustion with endless takes and perfectionist reshoots. His colleagues admired his artistry but dreaded working under him. To Chaplin, compromise was weakness, and his relentless pursuit of excellence left frustration in his wake. His personal life was no less controversial. Chaplin's relationships with much younger women scandalized Hollywood, sparking moral outrage and fierce criticism. Accusations of inappropriate behavior and his unapologetic lifestyle fueled tabloid headlines for decades. By the 1942, his political views, particularly his outspoken leftist sympathies, turned him into a target during America's Red Scare. Once celebrated as a national treasure, he found himself labeled un-American, a pariah in the very country that had made him a star. Exiled from the U.S. in 1952, Chaplin's fall from grace was as dramatic as any of his films. He lived out much of his life abroad, both revered as a genius and reviled as a scandalous figure. Charlie Chaplin will always be remembered as a legend of cinema, but his story is proof that even the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. He was adored by millions, hated by many, and unforgettable to all. And there you have it, the 25 most hated stars in Hollywood's history. Legends who lit up the screen but left storm clouds behind the camera. Some were tyrants on set, others fell from grace through scandal, and a few crossed lines so dark that their names became synonymous with disgrace. But what unites them all is a haunting truth. In Hollywood, talent alone is never enough. Fame magnifies everything: the brilliance, the flaws, and the demons. For every dazzling performance, there was often a trail of broken trust, shattered friendships, and a reputation that could never be repaired. Some of these stars managed to claw their way back into public affection. Others were condemned forever. Yet, love them or loathe them, they each remind us of the razor's edge between admiration and hatred in Tinseltown. Because in the end, Hollywood doesn't just create stars, it devours them. So, what do you think? Which of these stars shocked you the most? And which one do you believe truly earned their place on this list? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's darker side, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for more untold stories from the golden world of fame and scandal.